Hello and welcome to Talking Turkey. I'm Ahval editor David Lepeska, and joining me today is Kerim Has, an independent political analyst and researcher on Turkey-Russia relations. Hello, Kerim, and thanks for joining us.
Hello, David. Thank you for the invitation.
We're speaking on Wednesday, the day after Turkish President Erdogan and Russian President Putin laid out their plan for northeast Syria. We'll get to that deal in a minute, but first I'd like to take a broader view. Turkey and Russia backed opposing sides in the Syrian civil war. Moscow provided air power to support Syrian President Bashar Assad, while Turkey supported rebel groups seeking to oust Assad. They were even at each other's necks at one point in 2015 after Turkey shot down a Russian jet over the Syrian border, and Moscow responded with harsh sanctions. But now the two have emerged as partners and power brokers in Syria, sitting down for 6 hours of talks to essentially decide the country's fate. How did we get here?
First of all, I think the Turkey is much more becoming much more dependent on the Russian vision in the Middle East, and the Turkish-Russian relations in Syria are approaching to each other in recent years after the jet crisis, especially. And as you know, the Moscow Declaration in December 2016 paved the way for the Astana summits between the two countries, and we came to this point actually from where we had been before the jet crisis, and Turkey has already accepted Russia's the main power broker in the region, the status of Russia as a main broker in the region. And the Astana format of the three powers, Russia, Iran, and Turkey, much more served the interests of Russia. And in my opinion, just with the Sochi deal yesterday, we can say that Erdogan's Turkey has already accepted the legitimacy of the Assad regime officially at this point. So it seems that we will, in the following period, we will talk about Turkey's rapprochement or Ankara's rapprochement with the Damascus and with the Assad regime, the normalization of the process, even though on a fragile ground, it will continue, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I was planning to get to that later, Turkey and Syria rapprochement. One thing that has happened, of course, between Turkey and Russia in the last couple of years is Turkey's purchase of this Russian-built S-400 missile defense systems, which was, of course, terribly controversial, and the components have just been arriving in the last few months. Tell me a bit about that.
In fact, the purchasing process of S-400 started in October 2016 after the coup attempt in Turkey. It's a bit controversial indeed, because in my opinion, S-400 systems are not compatible with Turkey's already existing NATO radars and its arms systems and defense systems, actually, in general. But in any case, Mr. Erdogan insisted on buying these systems from Russia. It was also detrimental to Turkey's own interests in the region, actually, and it was after the energy sphere, Turkey became much more dependent on Russia on the strategic base, on the military plan, actually, on Russia, and the S-400 missiles are incompatible with, as I said, Turkey's already existing defense systems, and also against which country Turkey purchased such a system. It's also a big question. So when we consider the balanced power in the region, in fact, Turkey is much more feeling security threats from Syria, first of all, maybe, and then from Iran. But these S-400s are not the official tools to eliminate these threats. So, in my opinion, it was just a political bribery that was given by Turkish side to the Kremlin beforehand, in case such a situation as Maduro situation in Venezuela, in case it happens in Turkey in the future, to ensure Russian support in such a case, it was in an advance payment actually from the Turkish side to the Kremlin. I take it like that, and probably it is also maybe a kind of a blood money of the Turkish side because of the designation of the coup attempt of 15th July in 2016.
Well, then, interesting. Then do you think, sorry, continue. Did you to finish?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I finished.
Well, then, will you see then Turkey flipping the switch and deploying the S-400s? Because some have said that it's that would truly trigger the full U.S. sanctions and not before then.
In fact, if Turkey switches on, it also doesn't mean anything, in my opinion, because against which country are you going to use this system? It will just give you some protection for local. It will just create some local bubbles to protect some specific targets, specific places maybe. As you know, there are some rumors also in the media, in the Western media, that in Russian media also, that Erdogan bought these systems just because to protect himself, his house, his palace in Ankara, and also in Istanbul, his house in Istanbul, or some specific targets. So it is also absurd actually, because with two missile systems, you are not able to protect. You cannot protect these the main strategic, for example, infrastructure of the country. What is the meaning of purchasing such kind of a important missile defense system? It should serve the interests of Turkey, but in this case, it is just an absurd situation actually.
So do you think then that Turkey won't turn them on?
No, I think Turkey can turn on, but in fact, it will not give any plus, any.
Well, right, that's what I'm saying. So if Turkey was to turn them on and not really gain any security benefit, but receive U.S. sanctions, it seems like a good idea to not turn them on then.
Maybe there will be a new consensus, a new concession from Turkish side to the Americans, but I'm not sure actually. We need to wait a bit because of the developments in Syria. We should also wait a bit for that, because it's the Sochi deal just yesterday was reached, and we should see the improvements on the ground. It's already quite fragile, but the fragility is going to increase actually, and so we will see. Maybe Turkey just will turn on, but then switch off and so on. I don't know actually.
Okay, so a few months after the arrival of the first S-400 systems in Turkey in July, which led to the Pentagon expelling Turkey from its F-35 stealth fighter program, or at least temporarily spending. Turkey and Russia are now talking about more S-400 purchases and laying out a plan for the future of Syria. Does all this suggest Turkey is moving closer to Moscow and further away from the U.S. and the West, as many have feared? Or are those concerns overblown? I mean, Turkey's still a member of NATO, and there are still U.S. nuclear weapons in Turkey, of course.
In fact, Turkey's dependence on Russia in strategic military sphere is increasing, it is sure. And after the two batteries, it is possible that Turkey is going to buy some other extra new batteries from Russia. It's also possible, I think. And also, still the negotiations about Su-type Russian planes didn't start yet, but it can also start soon. It is possible, but it also depends on how the Turkish-American relations evolve in the following period. What we see now is just Turkey is a NATO country, but Turkey is playing a Kazakhstan role in NATO for Russia. So a kind of a ineffective country in the region, and Turkey is just facilitating Russia's returning to the Middle East and to the region, including the Eastern Mediterranean region also. So it's and the areas, the fragile areas between Turkish-Russian relations are also increasing, because we didn't discuss it yet, but the Kurdish issue, for example, the Russia is emerging as the main broker in the region, not only in Syria, I think, after the Sochi deal yesterday. So we will see much more fragile areas in Turkish-Russian relations. But in parallel to that, Mr. Erdogan, Ankara is becoming much more dependent on Russian interests in the region, and it will be quite hard for Ankara to prevent Russian increasing of Russian presence in the region.
Okay, so yeah, to get to the deal for northeast Syria, the Sochi deal, as you call it, it seems like both Turkey and Russia got essentially what they wanted. Putin validated the Assad regime by getting Erdogan to commit to cooperate with it, and Erdogan is expected to successfully clear the Kurdish militia, the YPG, which Turkey views as a terrorist threat, from its planned safe zone area. So is the deal a win for both sides?
Actually, it is a deal for Mr. Erdogan, and it's a deal for Russia, for Syria, for the regime. And in any case, it is not a game. The operation Peace Spring is not beneficial. It didn't give some benefits to Turkey's own interest. I think it was not comparable with Turkey's own security interest in the region, in my opinion. It was just cutting the loss for Turkey to having much more losses, actually. For example,
but I thought the main goal of Operation Peace Spring was to clear this Kurdish entity from along Turkey's border areas, and I think it achieves that now.
In fact, if you look at the August, look at the agreement between Ankara and Washington in early August, we can see that Turkey and the United States agreed on creating a kind of a safe zone along the Turkish-Syria border on the eastern part of the Euphrates, and in the line of 440 kilometers, and in depth, with a depth of 32 kilometers, actually. So at the end of the day, after the operation, Turkey is just locked. Turkey could get into control just the line between Tel Abyad and the Resul line. It is 120 kilometers, and Turkish army will stay in the region in the foreseeable future with a depth of 32 kilometers. So it is less than the what was assumed in the early August, the agreement with the United States, actually.
Well, the Turkish-controlled area is smaller, yes, but on either side of that, the Syrian and Russian forces will control it. It won't be Turkish-controlled, but the Kurdish forces will be cleared from that area that Turkey wanted cleared.
Yeah, it is correct, but also in the agreement with the United States, the YPG forces, the Kurdish forces, were planned to removed to 30 32 kilometers far from the Turkish border, and also Turkish soldiers with the American soldiers were they start to patrol actually in the region. So if Turkey had waited, if Turkey waited for the full implementation of this agreement, I think the Turkey's gains would be much more than today's actually on the ground. And also,
so you're saying that basically Turkey's impatience has led to its losing of Turkish-controlled territory in this area and influence in this area.
Actually, the Turkey's gains, or I don't think that I should say, I don't think that the agreement with the United States would solve the problem, should solve the Kurdish problem or whatever else. I don't think so. But from the perspective of Ankara, if Turkey continued to implement the agreement with the United States, it could gain today much more, or today, or after 1 month, or after 2 months. It doesn't matter, but it could gain much more on the ground, and also in the diplomatic plan, because Turkey has already the image of Turkey quite lost. You know, in the international media, there are so many articles appeared about Turkey's relations with the jihadists.
But I mean, I think some would argue that that was never possible. Like because Trump always wanted to pull U.S. forces out, at least the majority of them, and so that was going to happen sooner or later. I think that was Turkey's view, and so they thought they had to act.
I don't know actually, but on the other hand, we should also accept the fact that from the eastern part of the Euphrates, there didn't happen any attack from the YPG forces to Turkey. So Turkey it is understandable that Turkey feels some kind of a threat from the YPG forces along its borders in Syria, but it will not be true if we say that YPG forces attacked to the Turkish territory during these 8-9 years until the Operation Peace Spring. So it was in my opinion, Turkey also didn't solve its own Kurdish problem inside the country, but it just paved the way of the internationalization, and it just paved the way of internationalization of its own Kurdish problem, and it gave a tool to the Russian side, a new tool. It's a Kurdish tool actually to the Russian side in case it is needed from Moscow. Now Russia can use the Kurdish card against Turkey if it needs at any time actually. So from the United States, that card has already passed to the Russian side. So United States, I'm not supporting the idea that Turkey should work with the United States to solve its Kurdish problem, but from the perspective of Ankara, the United States, America, or Western powers are your allies. You are a NATO ally. It will be much more difficult now for Turkey to reach a deal on the Kurdish issue.
So yeah, under the deal, Russian and Syrian forces began moving into areas along the border with Turkey starting about an hour ago. And they have 6 days to remove the YPG and its weapons and fortifications about 32 kilometers south. Mm-hmm. Assuming that has been done by next Tuesday, Russian and Turkish troops will then begin joint patrols of the area. So do you see any stumbling blocks, any problems with this part of the plan?
Actually, I don't think there will be a huge problem in this plan, because the YPG forces, they don't have any other option other than removing from the Turkish borders, and they have to. They already they need to work with the Damascus. The United States doesn't have any apparent and effective presence in the region, so they don't have any other option other than working with the Russian side and Damascus. So I think, in my opinion, they will have to remove from the Turkish border the depth of 30 kilometers. But there is nothing in the Sochi deal about disarmament of the YPG forces. So the Russian side probably is aiming at wants to integrate the YPG forces into the Syrian army, because in the Russian perspective, in Russian Kurdish perspective in Syria, there shouldn't be any independent army of Kurdish people which is independent from the Syrian army actually. So in any case, Russia could be able to give such a guarantee to the Turkish side, and it was expectable, at least for me, during the yesterday's talks. So the Russia gave such a guarantee to the Turkish side, and on the other hand,
wait, just to be clear, you're saying that the Russian forces will somehow force the YPG to join the Syrian army?
I think at the end of the day, we will see it. It will not be just in 24 hours, but YPG forces are going to be integrated, are going to join the regime forces, Syrian army in general, and there will not be any independent military structure on the Kurdish populated areas in Syria.
It's interesting that you say that, because there have been reports on Twitter already in the last couple of days that Syrian regime forces in Manbij have begun arresting young men and taking them to former U.S. base outside the city and torturing them, detaining them. Is this the sort of thing that you expect to see more of as Russian-Syrian control of this area?
Of course, there can be some kind of an developments that they need to show the stick actually to the Kurdish forces. It is important just to push them to accept their own terms. For example, why Russia allowed Turkish forces to enter to launch an offensive in Afrin, for example, last year. It is also the same logic here also works out actually. So in any case, it will also be a gain for the Syrian army, regime forces, because it will be a kind of a new, an additional power that will strengthen the regime forces. I mean, the Kurdish force, the Kurdish fighters. If they are going to join the Syrian army, it will be a plus for Damascus actually. So they can also Assad regime can hasten the operation in Idlib also with the regime forces. They will be much more stronger, and Turkey is alone already on the ground. The United States are withdrawing, and the other Western powers are not going to stay, in my opinion, after the United States is withdrawing. So it is clear that the fact that the Kurdish forces are withdrawing from the Turkish border 30 kilometers, at the end of the day, it will give the Syrian army an extra motivation to launch faster an operation in Idlib, and to hasten this operation, to accelerate this operation. And Turkey will not be able to insist on its own reserves, on its own terms in Idlib anymore, because probably the Russian side will say to the Turkish counterparts to take these radical and some kind of opposition groups, which are classified, mostly classified by Russia as terrorist organizations, but Turkey is cooperating with them. So Russia will increase its pressure on Turkey to convey these groups in Idlib to the newly Turkey-controlled areas on eastern Euphrates, for example, to the Tel Abyad Resul Ain region, I mean. So it will be easier for Russia in this case to launch an operation. The operation is already continuing, but to hasten to to speed up the Idlib operation, actually.
So you're saying part of this deal is that Turkey-allied rebels will leave Idlib, thus allowing Assad's forces easier way to retake Idlib.
Yeah. I think it is a part of the deal. It is not mentioned in the deal officially, but it's also a part of the deal.
Okay. A Syrian observer said on Twitter this morning, while you were sleeping, Erdogan went from butcher Assad must go to Assad government is a legitimate government that can enforce bilateral treaties. He was exaggerating, but only a little bit. Erdogan and Assad are certainly not on friendly terms. On Tuesday, Assad called Erdogan a thief for referring to Turkey's incursions into Syria. So how do you see interactions between Erdogan and Assad going, considering their frosty relations?
In fact, if you look at the deal, we can see that the fourth point, I think, there is it insists on the importance of the Adana Agreement of 1998, and Turkey, Ankara has already accepted the mediator role of Moscow to normalize its relations with Damascus. So it's a huge gain, I think, for Russia, because the Adana Agreement gives Kremlin the possibility to maximize Russian interests on the Syrian issue, especially considering the recent developments on the ground. And first of all, the full implementation of the agreement requires a direct and open dialogue of Ankara and Damascus, and it would also reduce tensions and hostilities in the region and prevent any conflict between Turkish and Syrian armies, and strengthen the legitimacy of the Assad regime. And if the number one enemy of the Syrian authorities, Erdogan's Turkey, officially readmits Assad's rule in current conditions, that would be a huge gain for Russia's settlement policy in Syria, I think. And also, maybe we can add here that Moscow also has already emerged as the unique powerful player in the Middle East that keeps in contact with everyone, and a recovery in Turkey-Syria relations, albeit slowly, would definitely bolster up Russia's mediator role in the region. And that would also be, in my opinion, invaluable contribution to Russia's new status in the Middle East, where the historical image and reliability of the American hegemony matter.
Okay. One last question for you. So Trump decided this week to keep 200 U.S. troops in Syria, he said, to protect Kurd-controlled oil fields. Energy is also a key reason Russia is in Syria, which is said to have some promising oil and gas potential in the Eastern Mediterranean. Many argue that this is another area where Turkey has turned away from the West because Ankara is now facing EU sanctions for its drilling operations off the coast of Cyprus. Is this another possible area of cooperation for Erdogan and Putin in connection to Syria and Eastern Mediterranean oil and gas?
In fact, I think the Eastern Mediterranean region it's quite important for the Russian interests, and Moscow is going to strengthen its position in the Eastern Mediterranean. But you mentioned about this oil reserves in Syria, right?
Yes.
So, but I don't think that the United States is able to control these oil reserves for long run. It seems to me unrealistic, actually. After some time, the United States is going to give these reserves, these refineries to the Assad regime, I think, because it is not possible in any case. So the presence of the United States is already reduced to the minimal level. So they will have just some kind of a diplomatic engagement process probably with Turkey. But in Syria, I don't think that the presence of the Western powers will be huge or big enough to protect the Russian side or the Syrian side to achieve its aims in energy reserves. And also we know that the oil reserves of Syria are just enough for Syria itself. It is not for export or for some other trade benefits, actually. So probably the bargaining process continues with Russian side, and it will give its fruits after some time, I think so. But what about the Eastern Mediterranean? It is important, but the Rosneft, the Russian state oil company, and also Gazprom has some projects in Eastern Mediterranean. And also Russia is already strengthening its military presence in the Eastern Mediterranean. It's also quite important. So there opens a window of opportunity with Turkey in this region. It is correct. I think I also agree with this thesis. But we need to see also the developments, because in my opinion, Mr. Erdogan, after some time, to cover the governance crisis, his governance crisis inside the country, and he needs to consolidate his power. And this governance crisis of his governance crisis continues and deepens, even though after the Operation Peace Spring, he has already consolidated a bit. But after some time, after 6 months, after 1 year, the economic problems again will be the main topic, will be the main disturbing point for the Turkish society. So after some time, after 6 months or after 1 year, Erdogan can try to have a new adventurism actually in his foreign policy, and there can be such kind of new adventurism in the Eastern Mediterranean also. So we should wait a bit to say that there can be a sustainable cooperation area in the Eastern Mediterranean with Russian side. So it's also fragile.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kerim Has, for your time and your insight.
Thank you, David. It was my pleasure.